Story 1. Doctors in the emergency room gave me penicillin after an operation to treat a severe infection. I am severely allergic to penicillin and had informed them. It was documented in my charts and indicated on my medical alert bracelet. My throat closed up, and my pulse oximetry dropped to 67%. They tried to argue that I was unaware of the trauma to avoid paying any pain and suffering damages. Their own computer records showed that I was repeatedly pressing the call button on my bed during the long minutes before the allergic reaction triggered a code blue. The judge reprimanded the hospital's lawyers before issuing a judgment against the hospital for an amount in the six figures. Story 2. Guillain-Barré syndrome just this February. Within 48 hours, I went from being a healthy 27-year-old to being completely paralyzed on a ventilator in the intensive care unit. I was hospitalized for 6 weeks. I am home recovering now. Story 3. 35. Heart attack. Blockage in the left anterior descending artery. I drove myself to the hospital after 8 hours of not being able to take a full breath. According to the doctors, I would not have lasted much longer if I had not gotten to the emergency room and the catheterization laboratory when I did. Story 4. Was spiked, collapsed to the floor, and started vomiting but was paralyzed so could not roll on my side and was choking on the vomit. In the ambulance, I heard my mother talking to me, telling me I was not going to die. Turns out she was never in the ambulance. It is strange what the brain does to calm you down when it thinks it is your last moment. Story 5. I came to the hospital due to bleeding from my stomach ulcer. I threw up so much blood that I started to freeze. The only thing I remember was one of the doctors saying that we were losing the patient. Suddenly, I was lying in a hospital bed in one of the rooms and opened my eyes. 2 days had passed. I was 15 years old at the time. Today, I am a 49-year-old man. Story 6. My first memory is of nearly drowning when I was a baby. My mother told me it was not real my whole life until I saw a baby picture my grandmother had of me in the yellow float. Good times. Story 7. Many years ago, I was learning how to kayak. My friend loaned me his boat, and a few of us went to a small stretch of the Grand River, just south of a town called Elora in Ontario, Canada. My friend had taught me how to upright a kayak that had capsized, but I wasn't very good at it yet. He advised me to simply pull off the spray skirt and bail out if I flipped. We reached a simple section of white water, but I did end up flipping. I didn't panic. I reached up, pulled off the spray skirt, and tried to eject myself from the kayak. My sandal strap got stuck on the foot peg. I tried tugging with my leg, but the sandals and foot pegs were sturdy, and nothing budged. Keeping my wits, I bent forward to reach in and undo my sandal. While reaching up, a rock on the river bottom caught me on the chin and bashed my head backward. Still a bit dazed, I reached up and tried again. I almost managed to get hold of the sandal strap just as another rock struck the bridge of my nose. That rock dazed me but didn't knock me out. I fought to reach my hand out of the water. At that moment, my friend tossed me a rescue rope from the bank. He had seen what was happening and managed to get a line to me. With the rope gripped tightly in one hand and the kayak full of water still strapped to my foot, I felt like I was being torn in half. Fortunately, the strap broke under the pressure of the white water, and my friend reeled me to shore. He thought I had broken my nose because of the blood on my face, but it wasn't broken. I have a nose that looks broken when covered in blood, but it was intact. Being flipped over and stuck to a boat underwater while dragged through rocky white water was one of the closest calls I've had. There are a few more, but that was the most memorable. Story 8. 19 years old and pulled out of a very cold river while tubing with some friends. I was extremely hypothermic. I could not talk and needed 2 friends to help me walk because I could not do it on my own. 20 years ago, battling severe depression and anxiety, I came within a couple of minutes of ending my life. Story 9. 22-year-old. Got forced off the road by a drunk driver at 110 kilometers per hour. 25-year-old. Struck by lightning while closing a window. 31-year-old. Entire life collapsed. Friends disappeared because my fiancé couldn't stand them, and then my fiancé became an ex. Brother had a total mental breakdown. My 12-year-old dog died, followed closely by 3 family members. was not in the best shape. I would probably take my chances again with the first two any day of the week. Story 10. In recovery from donating my kidney to my cousin, I was given Dilaudid in a pump. I leaned on the button for maximum effect, and the next thing I knew, I was about to be intubated, having stopped breathing. My oxygen saturation was only 19. I had to be given 2 shots of naloxone. They tell people to be prepared for a wild scene after administering naloxone, and I did perform. My family was waiting outside my room, terrified after seeing a dozen doctors run in responding to the code that was called a code yellow. I came to with all these white doctors' coats in my face, yelling, "Breathe, miss, breathe." I thought I was already dead. I cried out, "I don't want to die. I want my father." So they brought him back into my room, and I yelled, "Daddy, I don't want to die like Mommy did," as she had passed 30 years before. I will never stop cringing. Story 11. Both my pregnancies were life-threatening. Severe preeclampsia with my first. Blood clots with my second. There will be no third. I want to live. Story 12. My brother threw a steak knife at me and I almost bled out. He broke our home phone, and I could not call for help. I passed out and woke up in the hospital. When I was born, the doctors gave my mother the option of saving either herself or the baby. We both lived. It was a complicated birth. I almost died from 2 different suicide attempts and was in the intensive care unit for 4 days. Story 13. Allergic reaction to prescription colonoscopy preparation laxative. Watched tennis ball-sized hives rise on my skin within 30 minutes of taking it. I was hooked up to intravenous fluids in the emergency room as my throat was closing up within 1 hour of taking the laxative. Spent 4 hours wheeling my intravenous rack in and out of the emergency room bathroom as the laxative took effect. Coronavirus disease 2019, experienced multiple episodes of asphyxiation and woke up with a 105-degree fever. Experienced loss of consciousness, falling face down on the carpet. Had an out-of-body experience due to the fever. Story 14. I had the flu and pneumonia on top of having asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, although I have never smoked. I also had an unusual virus or bacteria growing in my lungs, according to the infectious diseases doctor. They said it is rarely found in the lungs, so they were unsure how to treat it. They put me on 3 antibiotics and steroids. Finally, a week later, I was able to come home with another month of antibiotics. They were not sure if the growth would disappear or return at other times. This was well before the COVID-19 pandemic, but everyone had to wear masks to enter my room, which was disheartening. I was out of breath after walking just 5 steps to the toilet. It was rough. Story 15. Ectopic pregnancy 2 years ago. Found out I was pregnant 2 days ago, and it is a familiar feeling. Story 16. Almost intentionally drove my car into a several-foot-deep river. It was on an extremely harsh bend that I approached at a dangerous speed. Instincts kicked in, and somehow the car did not go in. Story 17. I was run over by a vehicle when I was 22. The back tire went over my head and fractured my skull. Then I had a pulmonary embolism in the hospital. Story 18. I had a tooth infection, and my throat swelled shut. I also had double pneumonia and was on life support. Story 19. Overdose. Saw a blue unicorn walk in front of my bed through the door. Sat up and vomited while snakes were eating my vomit. Woke up 16 hours later. Shocked I was alive and feeling extremely intoxicated. Story 20. I got trapped in the middle of a train bridge once and had to hang off the side while 2 miles of cars went by. There was a 100-foot drop into a gorge beneath me. After the cars passed, I had to find strength from somewhere I have never been able to access again to pull myself up. Story 21. Oh wow, how long can we make these posts? At 3 years old, I broke my leg and got a staph infection at the hospital. The doctor overdosed my antibiotics, putting me in a week-long coma. A kid in a pool didn't notice me and pushed his inflatable mattress over where I was diving. At a live fire exercise, the 155mm cannon behind our battery misfired, dropping a 40-kilogram grenade 250 meters, 800 feet. into a single treetop behind us. The jump director mistook our jump order at my first skydive, guiding me to land in a tree. My first allergy attack happened while I was jogging alone in an industrial district on a Sunday night, forcing me to crawl for 40 minutes back to my car in 4 degrees Celsius. 3 times during my 9-year stay in Cyprus, cars from the opposite direction swerved into my lane on mountain roads, forcing me to dodge into the ditches. The last thing I can think of is that I once crossed the road on my bike and didn't see a truck. He saw me and had good reactions, though. I don't believe I'm a callous guy, but life can be a bit chaotic sometimes. Story 22. COVID-19 was one point where I did not think I would last the night. With the suffering, I did not really care. Story 23. A few years ago, I was at a beach and swam out a bit further than I intended. I stopped to catch my breath and realized there was no ground beneath my feet. I saw how far I was from shore and tried to get back in, but the pull of the tide was so strong it felt like if I moved 1 meter, the tide would pull me back too. I was getting exhausted and had nearly resigned myself to my fate. I don't know how I did it, as I'm not a strong swimmer, but I think those few seconds when I stopped to think and just let myself go gave me enough rest to gather a second wind. I kept pushing and made it back. At the time, I really thought that was the end. Story 24. Stupidity. I decided I could fix my tumble dryer myself with a YouTube tutorial. It was a small fix. The YouTube video never said to unplug it from the wall. In fairness, I knew I had to do this but was so focused on following the video I didn't think to do it. I took a shock from the mains that nearly blew me across the room. I am amazed I didn't die. It hurt like hell. Story 25. Once, as a child, I was picnicking in Louisiana Bayou Land. My siblings laid a trail of bologna from the alligator-infested water to my feet, and the alligators were closing in. Luckily, my parents caught them in time. It is to be hoped that they were satisfied by the bologna and did not feel the need to eat a 7-year-old. My closest experience to death was when I was in a car crash after losing control on a downhill S-curve in the rain. I hit a large tree head-on and got a steering wheel in the chest. Somehow, the cabin held up, so I was not pierced by tree limbs or metal debris. Story 26. Asthma. I am not completely sure what I had or what went wrong, but my lungs suddenly stopped working. When I arrived at the hospital, people were rushing all around me. I nearly vomited on the nurse. I was lightheaded and barely breathing. My oxygen level dropped extremely low, and I heard my mother crying from outside the room. The plan was to put me into a reduced coma, but the chances of survival were slim. After more rushing around, a certain medication was given to me and fortunately started working. I was in the hospital for months after that. Story 27. I was on the verge of suicide last year. I had a plan, a particular stretch of motorway with no lighting. At night, I would pull over the work van, let the tire down, and call the office to say I had a flat. Then, I would step in front of the next truck that came past. It would seem like just a tragic accident, so people wouldn't have to know the truth. A death or accident at work would mean my partner at the time would receive compensation that would pay off our debt and set us up for a few years at least. It was all set, just waiting for a truck, but instead, another one of our work vans pulled up. He saw that I was stranded roadside and stopped to see if I needed help. He will never know that he saved my life that day. How do you even tell someone that? Nearly a year on, things are much better for me. Story 28. Shark visit while surfing. I was 14 years old, surfing alone late, about 150 meters out from shore, and saw the fin. The shark swam in a zigzag pattern slowly toward me. When it was about 15 meters away, the fin went under, as if to attack from underneath. I tucked my legs under the board and made my peace. A dolphin popped up, looked at me, and then swam off. Story 29. The closest I came to dying was not just one moment. It was every night I used, not caring if I woke up. I had drugs in my veins, demons in my head, and no reason to believe I could change. One infection nearly took me out, but honestly, it was the hopelessness that really killed me inside. I did not truly start living until I picked up a pen and started writing my pain into rhymes. That is when I began to fight back, not just to survive, but to heal. Story 30. I was approximately 9 years old when I put a bare wire into the socket and got electrocuted. In my defense, I thought I could get free cable television that way, but I did not. Story 31. I was in a head-on collision with a drunk driver on the freeway at 3 a.m. They contacted my emergency contacts and told them I had a 2% chance of survival. Story 32. I gave birth to my son, and the midwife did not check my blood loss. I lost a lot of blood and had a seizure. I was clinically dead for a minute and a half. After cardiopulmonary resuscitation and receiving many tubes, I was unconscious for another day and suffered seizures for nearly 6 months afterward. Story 33. Probably when I had sepsis at age 21. But feeling like I was going to die, I had dozens of experiences like that growing up with generalized anxiety disorder in an abusive household. Story 34. I have been in a car accident where we flipped over several times and landed upside down. I have been in a house fire. I have experienced alcohol poisoning. I have had a gun pulled on me. Almost 2 years ago, I did too much cocaine one night to the point where I actually thought I was going to die. Story 35. Fell 15 feet onto steel beams. Landed on my shins, which miraculously did not break. I do not think my neck would have done as well. The bruise has not healed in 6 years. Story 36. I got in the back seat of the church van. My sister wanted me to be more social. I moved up a few rows. The van was involved in a crash. The rear of the van was torn off. Story 37. Sniper at Karangal Valley, December 13th, 09. The boy was an arrogant nail, very well trained. I felt the wind of the 7.62mm round was right by my face. It was so fast. A buddy crawled up and thought he got me. He almost did. Probably around a 700-meter shot. No, I'm just like you, kissing the ground. 6 hours later, we caught him on a relocate. Nothing but respect for that guy. My lord, he was good. He would shoot and compensate for bullet drop and the wind differential in the valley. The round would arch and dip down. Very well trained. Story 38. Overdose and being held at gunpoint occurred on separate, completely unrelated occasions about 17 years apart. Story 39. My ex-boyfriend was chasing me, high on drugs and delusional, trying to attack me with a baseball bat. I was hiding behind a gate when a couple of neighbors noticed him trying to climb over it. They intervened, and he ran away. I never saw him again. I am only alive because they happened to be on the block. If they had not been there, I would have been smashed like a pumpkin on Halloween. Story 40. I had polyhydramnios when I was pregnant with a sick child who was not destined to live very long. My abdomen expanded as far as it could, and eventually the amniotic fluid started to push back against my organs. I was on all fours in a hospital bed for almost a week, went pale, could not pass fluids, and knew I was going to die if they did not break my waters within the next day or two. They did break my waters, but only after I threatened to harm myself. Turned out I was also in full labor. Story 41. I have been shot at and had a rookie police officer, extremely nervous, pointing a gun at me. I have been shot in the leg and have been extremely close to dying on a motorcycle several times. Story 42. Catatonic state, psychosis before. My mother gave me a bunch of sleeping pills dissolved in water. I woke up in the psychiatric ward days later being told I almost died. I have absolutely no memory of anything besides her handing me a cloudy glass of water. Story 43. Almost hit by a javelin at school during training. No, we did not practice javelin dodging that day, only I did. Story 44. When I was born, I was in the neonatal intensive care unit for about 2 to 3 weeks. Birth complications caused a number of problems. The umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck. I was a stargazer, and after all that was said and done, I was not showing signs of being a healthy baby. I cannot remember all that was wrong with me, but I do know I was desperate to die. Story 45. I cannot swim. I got drunk one night during a heavy downpour. Leaving the pub, I thought it would be fun to climb a tree in the rain and stand on a branch hanging over the river. The river was overflowing and raging. I slipped, of course, and was underwater in the torrential river. I was carried down the river very quickly and very far before I managed to grab a tree root and pull myself out. I traveled a distance of about 4 football fields. I was drunk. I had to get a cab home naked because the driver would not let me in with wet clothes on. I was also walking home from work one day along a busy road when a reckless driver in his van looked for something in his passenger footwell. He mounted the curb and hit the guardrail directly in front of me. If I had been a step or two slower, I would have been hit by the van. Literally inches away from me. Story 46. The tractor was stopped on a 2-lane highway at 10:15 p.m. with nowhere near enough lighting. All I saw were headlights in the opposite lane. I realized what it was at the last second and tried to steer my car into the ditch. Instead, I bounced off the tire at 50 miles per hour, jumped the ditch, and flew through a cornfield. I hit the tires hard enough to knock all 3 off the axle, and they found my battery in the field the next day. I walked away with a broken kneecap, but to this day, I am convinced that if not for the last-second swerve, I would have been killed. Story 47. I took an overdose a few years ago with the intention of not waking up. I woke up over 24 hours later in the intensive care unit. My first thought was not, thank God I'm still here. It was more along the lines of, how am I still here? Story 48. Overdosing on a bottle of medication after my parents left me alone for a poker tournament. I was 19 and had just been forced to move back into a toxic home after 2 separate housing situations fell apart. I did not want to be alive if it meant living another day in that house. I forgot my younger sister was still home. She was the one who had to witness me convulsing on the floor and ran to her friend's house down the road to get help. The second time I attempted the same thing 2 years later, I left the house and took the same medication while on a nature walk. That time ended with a work friend running out of her house in her pajamas to come find me after someone contacted her. I wish I could say that was the last of it, but those thoughts never truly go away. They linger. They consume me. They keep me up at night. I even dreamed about it again in my sleep last night. Mental illness is the closest I have come to dying. Story 49. My parents invited my family and me to look at some Christmas decorations the city had put up. We went downtown and checked them out. Once we finished, it was dark, overcast, and starting to rain. We needed to cross the main street through town to get to the car. My parents started to cross, and so did my wife and I, each of us holding a child's hand. There was a single vehicle that had just turned onto the road, coming towards us, but it was a block away and the speed limit was 25 miles per hour. I had an urge to look at the incoming car. The headlights were very bright and much closer than they should have been. I yelled, "Run!" In my mind, I saw myself, my wife, and our kids get plowed over, but our feet touched the curb on the other side. I looked immediately to my left and saw a work van 20 or 30 feet beyond us. I assumed that it had turned onto the main road and immediately accelerated to 40 or 45 miles per hour, just narrowly missing us. I did some quick math using the distance from maps, and the vehicle could have sped up to 55 miles per hour. Story 50. I have been struck by lightning, had a life-threatening injury as a child from colliding with a motorcycle while riding a bike, experienced heart failure at 46, received a heart transplant at 47, developed fungal meningitis immediately afterward, went into cardiac arrest 7 to 8 times, and lived to talk about it all. Story 51. I was born premature at 35 weeks and had an uncommon complication with my lungs for my age, which is more common in babies born earlier than I was. A few hours after birth, I was transferred by ambulance to another hospital with a higher-level neonatal intensive care unit. I was on continuous positive airway pressure for oxygen support but continued to decline. I eventually reached maximum support, so they had to put me on a ventilator to breathe for me. Later, they put me back on continuous positive airway pressure, but a large amount of mucus blocked my airway, so I could not breathe. The hospital called a code pink. The incubator I was in opened by itself, and the room filled with many doctors and nurses. My dad had to leave because there was no space. I then had a brain scan to check for brain damage. I had a brain bleed that they monitored but eventually healed on its own. I spent 10 days in the hospital. I was only 5 pounds 2 ounces but was large compared to the other babies around me. Story 52. 5 Stevens-Johnson syndrome episodes. I don't remember anything. When I tried to ask about it, my mom hid my pictures from me. At age 29, I tried to commit suicide and ended up going to the hospital. I don't remember anything except being admitted to the ward. Story 53. The first time I electrocuted myself was disassembling my mom's lamp because I was upset she wouldn't let me help make my birthday cake. I was about 4 years old and the lamp was still plugged in. When I was 6, I was hit in the head with a rock, and it struck my temple, rupturing an artery and causing blood to shoot across the room. The very next week, on the same day they removed those stitches, my brother slammed my head in a door on the opposite side, requiring more stitches. My mom told everyone she had my horns removed. Then there was the time I was climbing onto the roof the same way I had many times before, but my brother sprayed me with the hose. It turned out that the wire sticking out under the eave, which I always used as a handhold, was live. At 29, I hit black ice and rolled my car. The roof hit a boulder right where my head was. The emergency medical technician was shocked I was alive. Story 54. When I had surgery and ended up on life support, it was not because of the surgery but the anesthetic. Turns out I have an incurable lung condition. Here's the situation. Next month, I have to have another surgery. The anesthetic is extremely risky, but I have no option. The surgery must be done. Story 55. I fell through the ice of a frozen lake near a dam with a strong current. I barely got my hand on the edge of the ice to save myself from being pulled under. Story 56. Got stabbed in the upper back 2 times with a saw-bladed small kitchen knife. It punctured my left lung so I could have drowned in my own blood. When I saw all the blood in the apartment and the hallway, I thought, I am going to die for sure. It was in 2015, but I still remember his soulless dead eyes before he stabbed me. Story 57. I was flying over eastern Ukraine a few hours before Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was downed. We were taking the same route in the opposite direction, from Kuala Lumpur to Amsterdam. Story 58. I was sleep-deprived, and I thought I could drive home. My mind completely failed me while driving. I unknowingly drifted into the oncoming lane, narrowly avoiding a crash. I ended up hitting the curb, and a loud horn snapped me out of it. Story 59. I feel like I have experienced many different ways of being close to death. Electric shock from not isolating properly before wiring equipment. Fell off a ladder. Sat in a sauna until I thought I had palpitations and became lightheaded. Ran off the motorway into the central reservation near a heavy goods vehicle. At a water park in Kos, there was a massive wave machine, and I almost drowned because I was unable to catch my breath between the waves. Walking home from work and being mugged at knife point. As a child, I ran out of a friend's driveway straight into traffic and was technically hit by a car. However, the driver was not speeding and braked immediately, so it only bumped me and I ran off. As an adult, I am genuinely impressed and grateful for that driver's competence and safety. So I might be a Highlander. Story 60. I was working a job that was really wearing me down. At some point, I started feeling a little suicidal. Not enough to actively attempt it, but enough to walk into a crosswalk in front of a car that was not slowing down as it should have. Luckily, the driver saw me in time and slammed on the brakes. The apathy I felt in that moment, knowing I could have died, still haunts me to this day. This happened almost 2 years ago, and I am doing much better now. Story 61. That's a tough one. I've had quite a few experiences. In my early years, when I was being bullied, a bully came half an inch from stabbing me in the gut with a shank they made out of a glass toothbrush. I've had 2 major wipeouts downhill on my longboard with no protective gear. I don't skate anymore because of the last one. I don't even know how I came out of it alive. Regarding the people mentioning coronavirus disease 2019, when I first contracted it, I thought I was going to die. I was bedridden for a week, and my back and spine were in so much pain that the only thing that took my mind off things was the strongest cannabis I could find. Story 62. In 2016, an ambulance took me to the emergency room. If you know anything about United States insurance, you would know I was desperate. I could not stand without falling down. It started in the morning and got worse during the day. It turned out my hemoglobin was at 3. Anything below 12 is anemic. I needed blood and stayed at the hospital for 3 days. Story 63. This car accident where I spun, flipped, and landed in a ditch car head first should have gone through the windshield for not having a seatbelt, but somehow landed in my back seat. Story 64. Age 33. I had a urinary tract infection that spread to my kidneys and caused sepsis. I never showed typical urinary tract infection symptoms, only fever and vomiting. I went to urgent care and asked to be tested for a urinary tract infection because I had similar symptoms once before in middle school, but they told me I was fine. 3 days later, I was in the emergency room with a blood pressure of 50/30. I spent 14 days in the hospital, at least half of that time in the intensive care unit. My kidneys stopped functioning completely. I was told I experienced cardiac arrest once. After about 9 days, the infection was gone, but I was still in a lot of pain while in the hospital. They performed exploratory surgery and removed my appendix. These were two completely different conditions that occurred within 10 days of each other. Took me months to recover. Story 65. One day, my 2 friends and I were drinking beer on the steps of a river, a normal teenager thing. The river was very deep and the flow was quite fast too. After finishing our beers, we started to jump on the steps, like jumping from the first step to the second, then the third. When I reached the second last step, I slipped because of algae on the steps. Half of my body was in the river, and somehow my friend managed to get hold of my hand and pulled me up. Otherwise, I would have been washed away in the river and drowned. I still think about that day. 1 second here and there, a fun evening could have turned into a tragedy. Whenever I think about it, it sends a chill down my spine, like how I got out of it alive. Story 66. I was walking on a railway crossing and was not crossing while the railway lights were on, but suddenly they turned on, signaling that a train was coming. I literally ran for my life. It was frightening. Story 67. I fell off a balcony while drunk on vacation. Luckily, I hit a wall partway down that helped break my fall. Story 68. As a teenager in Arizona, I was on the back of a motorcycle without a helmet because there were no helmet laws. The back tire got a puncture and lost all its pressure in about 10 seconds while we were on the freeway. My father had to fight the motorcycle every inch from 80 miles per hour to bring it to a stop without crashing. Story 69. Sepsis when I was 6 months pregnant. They told my family to come in to say goodbye because they did not think I was going to make it until the morning. Absolutely awful. Story 70. Motorbike crash in 2006. A car cut me off in a 110 km/h zone. I slammed into the back of it and regained consciousness lying on the road on my back with the front of a truck tire touching the side of my helmet, only a few centimeters from driving over my head. I broke both of my femurs, shattered my left kneecap, and ruptured all ligaments in that knee. I broke 6 ribs, punctured a lung, broke both wrists, and cracked 4 vertebrae from the 6th cervical to the 2nd thoracic. My right shoulder was severed through all but the skin. I spent several months in a wheelchair, many more on crutches, and relearning to walk. Yes, I still ride. Story 71. I'll give you a couple of times. 1. Jumped in the deep end of a pool when I was 2. My dad pulled me out. Was playing Chubby Bunny with some grapes when I was 4. Choked. My brother screamed for my dad, who ran downstairs and gave me the Heimlich maneuver. Jumped in the deep end of a pool when I was 5. My brother pulled me out. Learned to swim at 7. Rolled and fell off the roof of our house and landed about an inch away from a protruding sprinkler head. I don't know if I would have died though. Took 4 hits of LSD my first time during Thanksgiving with my extended family. Blacked out. Went aggressive. Shook off a family friend who was a linebacker at Fresno State. Threw a flying elbow right at my cousin's eye. Ran for the banister. Flipped over it and landed on the ground 12 feet below. Woke up in the hospital the next day with nothing more than a catheter. Shot heroin for 6 months. Not sure if this counts as close to dying, but it could have ended badly. Flipped a minivan 3 times when the axle broke in Shanghai. The roof had been crushed or collapsed everywhere except above the driver's seat. Walked away from that with a bruise and some scratches. avoided Chinese jail, but I had to take the entire police station out to dinner and pay for the replacement of some flowers. There may have been a few other times that I wasn't aware of, but I'm quite familiar with death, though I haven't seen him in a long time. Story 72. Does actually dying count? I had back-to-back cardiac arrests in 2018, followed by a week in a medically induced coma while my doctors tried to determine if I was going to have permanent brain damage. It turns out I was part of the 7% that did not. I received a heart transplant in December 2020 and did an Ask Me Anything a few months later that was very cathartic. It is still available on my profile if anyone is interested. Story 73. In October 2017, I started a new disease-modifying treatment for my multiple sclerosis. I completed 3 days of 8-hour infusions, but in the early morning hours before my 4th infusion, I felt very unwell. I called my neurologist and informed them. I was told to take another muscle relaxer. However, something in my gut told me to go to the emergency room. Long story short, the medication was indeed life-changing. I was having an intracranial hemorrhage in my left frontal lobe. I spent 5 days in the neurological intensive care unit. Lemtrada did not have a stroke warning label at that time, and when my neurologists contacted the company, they were told that this was about the 4th case. They were shocked. One neurologist wrote a paper, and apparently my case study led to the drug being banned in Europe. They made sure the medication now has a stroke warning, and neurologists changed how they prescribed the drug. Story 74. Severe sepsis when I was 16. I had a really bad case of streptococcal infection that had spread throughout my entire body, with a 41 degrees Celsius temperature and red, painful spots all over. I fainted a few times before my mother took me to the emergency room. The nurse told us to sit down and wait. My mother became very upset while I fainted again in her arms. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a bed with an intravenous drip providing fluids and antibiotics, a catheter, and a monitor. The doctor said I would have died later that day if my mother had not brought me to the emergency room. I spent the next week in the hospital. I could not walk, barely ate, and was in constant pain because the streptococcal infection caused acute rheumatism in all my joints. My caring mother had been dismissed by our general practitioner multiple times the day before. He said I was just having something like the flu and that the red spots were an allergic reaction to the antibiotics he had prescribed. I am 35 now and healthy, but when the weather gets colder or wetter, my joints still hurt as if I have rheumatism. Story 75. 2.5 millimeter main wire of my store. Red wire in the board socket and black wire in my hand. Saved by my sister who just came from coaching a few minutes ago. She pulled out the wire rather than pulling me. She had better presence of mind. Story 76. Fell off the Eglinton Go train station bridge, a height of 40 feet, onto the sidewalk below when I was 5 years old. Story 77. While completely intoxicated and hallucinating, I was looking for traffic in the wrong direction on a one-way street when a bus came down at full speed. I did not realize it, but the person I was with was already on the other side and suddenly looked scared as I was crossing. Somehow, I was not hit and only realized later what had happened. It did not sober me up, but I became more careful. Sobering up came later. Story 78. I did not know how to swim and dived into a deep pool. I almost drowned but was saved by someone who knew how to swim. Story 79. When I was a kid, probably 6 to 8 years old, I got caught in a riptide. The sheer panic of being swept out into the ocean still haunts me to this day. Thank God my grandpa, a former professional surfer, was there. He saved my life completely. Story 80. Caught in a crowd of people trying to exit the train. It caught fire. My hand got stuck in the railing and was later thrown out of the emergency window. Turned out to be just a rumor. Story 81. Motorcycle accident. I was driving the motorcycle with my grandmother, and I was feeling out of it because she woke me up early after I had stayed up all night the night before. As I was driving along the street and approached the intersection, I did not stop to look left and right for any vehicles that might be crossing. When we were already in the middle of the steep intersection, a speeding tricycle collided with us. Thankfully, the tricycle pressed the brake, or I would have broken my neck since the tricycle's metal cover hit under my jaw. Story 82. I fell from a height, landing on my head and back on a concrete pad about 15 feet. I blacked out and had a concussion, regaining consciousness a few minutes later. I spent the next week in severe pain before recovering. Another time, I crashed a motorcycle in Vietnam and broke my entire face. Jaw, eye sockets, nose, teeth, cheekbones, everything. I couldn't eat solid food for a few months before recovering. I basically broke everything I could without crushing my skull. Story 83. I choked on a stringy piece of steak when I was little and grabbed it out of my throat with my fingers. I do not eat steak much anymore. Story 84. The car died on the highway in the middle of the night. It clunked a couple of times and then stopped. I was able to get to the side a bit, but I was still halfway on the road. I was driving with my mother, but we had no time to get out and push the car all the way to the side when a huge semi-truck came speeding up. My life literally flashed before my eyes. I have no idea how he did not hit us, as he was in the lane we were partially in. Our lights were all off and it was completely dark. I guess he saw us at the last minute and swerved a bit, but the semi-truck was inches from our car. Story 85. When I was hit by a car while riding my bicycle, the driver fled and nearly ran over my head. Story 86. Telling my dad I'm leaving my husband to be with a woman. He stomped on the brakes so hard in the middle of the road, and we got hit from behind. I walked away unscathed, but I definitely saw my life flash before my eyes. Not only from the crash, but from the utter rage and sadness in his eyes. Story 87. A tornado hit my house in the middle of the night while everyone was sleeping. I had a loft bed and had to jump down to the floor when I heard the sound. It sounds like a train inside your house. By the time the tornado passed, the roof above my bed was gone, and my mattress was lifted as if it was about to be carried away too. Story 88. When I was 18, I became suicidal after being betrayed by someone I trusted. I got as far as pulling the cord tight around my neck before I stopped, remembering how badly my father's family was still affected by his suicide 17 years earlier. Story 89. 3 incidents come to mind. 1. In 1998, a kid tried to rob me in the parking lot of a convenience store. He approached me as I got to the door of my car and demanded my money while pointing what appeared to be an old Colt M 1911.45 caliber handgun at my head. I had $1,200 in my wallet that I had no plans of giving up, and 12 $1 bills in my pocket that I had gotten in change. I stalled by pulling the bills out of my pocket one at a time while I tried to figure out what I was going to do. At some point, he got frustrated and hit me on the side of my head with the pistol, causing me to bleed profusely. Eventually, I decided to get into my car while ducking the kid, who tried shooting me through the windshield. As I started the car, backed out of the spot, and exited the parking lot, I saw him pull the trigger with nothing happening, pull the slide back ejecting an unspent round, chamber another, and pull the trigger 5 times in total. The gun never fired. The only thing I can think of that saved me was that when he hit me in the head, I remember seeing something fly off the pistol. I think it may have been the wood grip shattering, and a piece may have severed or dislodged the firing pin spring. 2. In 1999, I took 26 Ambien tablets, which caused my heart to stop, but the emergency medical technicians got it going again. 3. In 2017, I slipped while doing an oil change on a Peterbilt truck and wedged my thigh between the bumper and the frame. It stung like crazy, but there was no obvious external damage. I hopped around, said all the appropriate expletives, and went back to work. By the time I got home and finished some computer work, my inner thigh looked swollen like I had a volleyball implanted in it. My wife made me go to the emergency room, which turned out to be a smart move because I had apparently put a small tear in my femoral artery and was bleeding into my leg. I lost so much blood that while in the waiting room, I seized, urinated on myself, and lost consciousness. They calculated I lost over 3 pints of blood before they got the tear closed. I would have died if we had waited another 30 minutes to come in. Story 90. I have a brain disease called idiopathic intracranial hypertension. I have had 13 brain surgeries and over 200 spinal taps. I have a ventriculoperitoneal shunt, which is why I have had all the brain surgeries. The shunt is a valve in my brain connected to a tube that drains the excess cerebrospinal fluid into my abdominal cavity. I was on a medication that caused severe constipation. It got so bad that the shunt tube punctured my bowels and waste entered my brain. As a result, I developed meningitis and Escherichia coli infection. I was in a coma for 2 months and underwent 3 emergency surgeries, including removal of part of my colon. There were multiple times when doctors thought I would not survive, but I did. I am still here. On the way to the hospital, when we realized something was seriously wrong, I started talking to my deceased grandmother, even though I have no memory of it. My ex-husband said I kept telling him she was there to keep me safe. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.